A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, Christmas is almost here. So how do you prepare to make an impression as a Christian this Christmas? Times have changed, and maybe we need to work harder at drawing attention to the true reason for the season. Well, Stephen McAlpine is an award-winning Christian author, pastor and national consultant for churches and Christian schools. He's been thinking through the issues around Christmas. He's back with us. Hey, Steve, welcome back to 2020.
So it's good to be with you right at the end of the year.
Hey, Steve, this time of year, and we always see this, in the month of December, there's a certain lightness and an ability to be able to share faith at this time of year that perhaps is not there at any other time. Is this something that you reflect on?
Yes, it's interesting that I have a twin brother. He's not Christian, but he took his two sons to carols last night somewhere, and he said, I might go back to the traditional service next week. And that was a bit of a head swivel moment for me. But I think you're right. Look, there's a meaning and purpose vacuum at the moment in the Western world. And there's something about Christmas, the depth of it, that I think makes people sit up and think maybe there's something more to it. And I think there's something, even in the last year or two, that people are going, why don't we lean into the kind of weirdness of what Christmas is actually about rather than the glossy stuff? And I think it's a great opportunity.
Interesting that when you say depth, because we could wade into the pool and we could talk about the deep end, or we could talk about the shallow end. Where do you think most believers are likely to be at when it comes to Christmas and Christ-centred Christmas?
Look, I think there's been a push among younger generation especially to think, Christians, how do we lean into what it means a little more, with a little more depth? And I do see that generally amongst younger Christians, that they want something a little bit deeper, but also because it's an age in which we've marked our years off by Black Friday, the end of financial year sales, and there's a lot of Christians who are going, hey, what about the Christian calendar? The fact that it's called Advent, and people leaning into the fact that Advent is about the time between the first coming of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus. And so evangelicals haven't played up the liturgy and the seasons of the Christian calendar very much, but I think I've seen a lot of people returning to it in our less liturgical churches. I've seen that happen in the last couple of years.
Are we selling ourselves short if we think, well, I'm a Christian and maybe I'll go to church on Christmas Day, but ignore the whole Advent, the lead up, the build up towards what Christmas really means? Are you suggesting that some people are saying we're missing some of the depth and the dimension because some of those things that come through liturgical worship are being missed at other churches? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying that evangelical churches, which are low evangelical in the sense that they don't have the liturgy, should just have that all. But even as you look at some of the readings and some of the songs, you realise that they march to the beat of a different drum, to just put that one in there. That the Christmas beat looks very different to the rush of life. And there is a sense in our culture as well that we're just racing along towards something, helter-skelter, without thinking about it. And I think there's a saturation point for that in our culture. And a lot of Christians are going, what if we kind of leaned into our identity as Christians and our calendar as Christians with a little bit more depth? And that's an encouraging thing. And I think that as people go along to Christian events, don't say no for non-Christians. Put on specifically Christian events at Christmas. I think that's a good idea.
You know, at Christmas time, I think the whole of our society loves the thought of peace on earth, joy and goodwill to men, but they don't know where that comes from. Is this one of those things where people are open to what they know they want, but they haven't been able to access how they get that?
Well, that's very interesting that when the angel appears to the shepherds in Luke 2, the angel says, I bring you good news of great joy that is for all people. And if you want to break that down specifically, it's good news from God for us, but it's not the joy doesn't spring from within us. The joy is coming to us from God. And I think that's critical to understand. And then when it says for all the people, it's saying the people that are longing and waiting for the Messiah, the Jewish people. And so as you understand the Christmas story a little deeper, you realize that the real joy is for the people who are longing for something more than what they can have in this world. And I think there's something about our culture at the moment that is still looking for something more. And I'm in a preaching series with the church that I'm involved with here, which is using the words more than hope, more than happiness, more than merry to describe what people are needing. It's as if there's something transcendent that people don't have, that they think it wouldn't be good if Christmas was more. And I think this is the time of the year that we can show them that it's when God breaks in. And I think that's important.
That word transcendence is not one that is typically on the lips of perhaps most people, but there's something different about this time of year. And you can see that there's something different because what's coming is coming from outside of ourselves. It's not generated from within. It's the baby who is the Son of God born in the stable. That transcendence, is this a moment when you might even just lean into that and recognize that there's something divinely important about this moment at Christmas time?
Well, it's interesting that in the West at the moment, there's that whole search for something external or transcendent that the search within hasn't really satisfied. So we've got a very anxious age, we've got a worried age, we've got an age that doesn't quite know where it's supposed to go for meaning and purpose. And so the idea of transcendence has come back in the West in an interesting way. That's going off in all sorts of pagan ways as well. But I think Christians can lean into, I guess, what I call the weirdness of Christian transcendence, because it's probably no weirder than most of the other views going around at the moment. But the fact that God breaks in is absolutely critical to the Christian Christmas message. I think it's the breaking in and bringing something to you that you can't resource from within yourself that's absolutely critical in just not the Christmas story, but the Old Testament lead up to it. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight, that aspect of it.
Now, I'm putting you on the spot here, Steve, because while we might be able to recognise there's this lack of transcendence, some will be saying, well, how do I lean into that and actually have an experience this Christmas which is bigger than the secular experience? Because when I'm listening to the secular media, I'm not hearing even any Christian carols. If I even go to the Christian carols concert, the carols by candlelight, there's not much even Christian content there. And maybe even in my local church, it's not looking a whole lot different. How do I lean into appreciation and accessing this transcendent dimension this Christmas?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. And look, I would say that there are good helps to avail of that, like Advent series and things like that. The hard thing is getting yourself out of the helter-skelter of the month before Christmas when everything's happening. And I wonder if there's a way of families and households saying to each other, let's at least mark something every day in the lead up to Christmas that is putting a little bit of time aside. What do we do at a mealtime to think about Christmas and what it means for waiting for your hope to come? It doesn't have to be as extreme as we're going to do a series of fastings, but plenty of churches in history have done that in the lead up. But it does mean, how do we put markers in place that say we're different to the culture around us? We have a different understanding of transcendence. It's not spooky and mystical in one sense. It's true and real because Jesus came into history. But it shapes how we think and act over the coming weeks and months. It's those small drip-filtered discipleship things for Christians over time that change them. But I do think it's over time. I think we've got a little bit of repair work to do in the West.
This appreciation of God with us, that he has broken through, that he has sent his only son. This is what we often will call the incarnation, and the ripple effects that go around the world and throughout history because God has fulfilled those promises. A Messiah has come. The joy and the peace and all of those things are accessible now, whereas they might have been not accessible so easily before. So when it comes to Christmas Day, let's bring this right back to where we'll all be. Christmas Day, perhaps opening those presents around a Christmas tree and navigating the sort of materialism that we're going to be bombarded with and trying to bring that Christmas spirit into our own homes. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, look, I think as Christians over the next 20, 30 years, if we become a less Christian country, we're going to have the opportunity to be much more reflective at Christmas, and also to say, how do we show the world that our satisfaction isn't in the stuff, it's in what God has done for us in Jesus. And obviously the other thing too is, in a more fractured society, what would it look like to share Christmas with other people more often? Because it seems that at church we're very good at saying, hey, we want to be hospitable and generous to other people, but Christmas sometimes becomes a very privatized event. What would it look like to go, okay, we've got our family here and we like having our family here, but let's just dial it up a little bit and invite someone in who would be on the outer, because that would seem to be completely in line with the ethos of what Christmas is about, if I thought about it.
And what about getting creative? Because, yes, keeping your eye out for someone, getting creative at home with your Christmas this year, whether you've got some younger ones, you might have, children or grandchildren, you might have aging parents, grandparents, getting creative because each of those different dimensions, each of those different generations may be even expecting different things around their Christmas.
Yes, look, it's interesting that you think about how the Jewish families used to celebrate Passover and the readings and the way they spoke about the events as if they were the people involved in the events. And I wonder too, a way we understand history, we think, well, it was 2,000 years ago. But in one sense, we want to recreate the immediacy of the wonder of it. I think that's worth doing, even though it was 2,000 years ago. And I wonder how we just meet with our family around the table. We either light a candle, read one of the readings, and just deliberately plan it out, because you probably got to plan it in October if you're going to do it in December. I reckon that's just the way. If you haven't planned it now, it might be a bit hard to retrofit it. But I wonder how we can operate seasonally as Christians in ways that thicken up the way we do our life together as family, at whatever stage our families are at. And don't forget, too, that for Christmas, for some people, it's a time of sorrow. How do we look forward to the second coming, the advent of Jesus? Because Christmas will be a time of sorrow for some people in their households. It's inevitable. And we want to be able to say there's still joy from outside for you, but not from you.
Churches provide services on Christmas, and you might think that's some sort of obligation on the church because it's, the babe in the manger. There might be a question for some, though, church or no church, because oftentimes you don't go to church on Christmas Day. There's certainly that segment that has, the Christmas and Easter type element, people who do turn up for church because it's a special time of year. What's your thought here? Church or no church? That's the question.
Yeah, I would say church. Do as much church as you can around the high points on the calendar. I mean, that sounds counterintuitive because everyone's exhausted. But I also think there's something deep and rich about it. And also gives people who aren't Christian perhaps the opportunity to look in and say, I wonder what's going on here. I say never waste a good event and never waste a Christmas event. Make sure that you proclaim the gospel clearly, but accessibly to people who are coming in. I think that's a critical thing. But there was a time there where church attendance at Easter was dropping off in Western churches, but it's picking up again. I think there's something in the Western church that they're realizing they're needing to lean deeper into their public affirmations of their big ceremonies and big events and celebrations, Easter and Christmas in particular, and to make sure that non-Christians get the opportunity to hear the gospel in those times.
And Steve, do you have any particular plans for your own family Christmas this year that you're able to share with us? Anything special coming?
Well, the good thing about our families is that we never have to choose where we're going, because both my wife's family and my family always get together at Christmas Day. And we're going back to Western Australia for that. And for me, that's been 30 years of getting together. And it's a poignant time as you think about ageing parents, and that you're now the generation that organises it. But I think those are good times to remember that if God is who he is, and Emmanuel is God with us, and God's hope is to bring in who brought in a Saviour who dealt with the worst enemy of all, the enemy of death, then Christmas is a good time to rejoice. And we'll do that at Christmas, even as our parents age and as we move into the next category. So I'm looking forward to just spending time with both sides of my family together. That's the one superpower in our household. We don't have to decide who's going where and which day and which year.
Well, what a great thing that is. Both sides of the family all getting together and celebrating Christmas. That's just fabulous. Hey, Stephen McAlpine, award-winning Christian author, pastor and national consultant for churches and Christian schools. Great insights today. Looking forward to a great Christmas, and thanks so much for making things a little bit deeper for all of us as we're thinking about what we're doing in the lead up to and on Christmas Day as we celebrate this most magnificent event, the incarnation of Christ, the birth of that baby in the stable and laid in a manger, the Saviour of the world. To connect with Stephen McAlpine, he has a website, stephenmcalpine.com. No doubt he's got some articles there too, and could be something special for Christmas. Stephen, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil, and have a great Christmas yourself.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.